Jack the Ripper. You know, it's a name that immediately conjures up these images, right? Gaslit alleys, London fog, a shadowy figure with a knife. But the legend of Jack the Ripper is so much more than a ghost story. It is a real, absolutely terrifying chapter of history. So today, we're going to peel back those layers of myth and really dig into the facts behind one of history's greatest and most chilling unsolved mysteries.
All right, so this is the world we're about to step into. London's East End, 1888. A place of deep, dark shadows and even deeper paranoia. I mean, just look at this illustration from the time. The fear was so real, so palpable, that regular people formed their own vigilance committees. These were just ordinary citizens patrolling the streets, hunting for this nameless terror that was living among them. This shows you it wasn't just a police investigation, it was a whole city holding its breath, terrified of what was in the dark.
And all of that fear, all of that paranoia, it all boils down to this one central question. It's a question that has haunted detectives, historians, and, well, all of us for over a century now. It's led to countless books and theories, but has given us exactly zero concrete answers. The question that I'm sure is on your mind is, who was he?
To even begin to answer that, we first have to understand how the legend itself was created. Where did this all come from? So let's start with the hard facts. Before all the myths, there was a man, an unidentified serial killer who was active in the dirt-poor slums of London's Whitechapel district, all in the year 1888. It's so important to remember this wasn't just some spooky story. For the people living there, this was a terrifying, all-too-real nightmare.
You know, that famous name, Jack the Ripper, wasn't actually his first. In the beginning, the police files just called him the Whitechapel murderer. Pretty straightforward, but out on the streets, a much more sinister name started to spread: Leather Apron. And that name, well, it was like pouring gasoline on the fire. It fueled public panic, it got people pointing fingers. It just goes to show how desperate everyone was to put a face to the monster they feared.
To really understand the killer, we have to understand his hunting ground. And believe me, this wasn't just a random backdrop. The environment of the Whitechapel district is a crucial character in this whole story.
And this isn't some dramatic artist's sketch. This is a photograph. This is the stark, grim reality of life in Whitechapel. Just look at the faces of these women and children standing outside a common lodging house. The killer's victims lived in places just like this one. They were transient, they were desperate, and they were tragically vulnerable.
The level of overcrowding here is almost impossible for us to imagine today. Just try to wrap your head around this number. In one small part of Whitechapel, there were 233 of these lodging houses, and they were crammed with an estimated 8,500 people. It's a staggering number, and it created the perfect conditions for a predator to show up, strike, and then just melt back into the anonymous crowd.
And the statistics of this place? They're just grim. This chart gives you an idea of what life was like. In this small district, there were an estimated 1,200 women working as prostitutes, but only about 62 official brothels. For so many of these women, this wasn't a choice. It was the only way to survive in a place where half of all children died before they even reached the age of 5. Life was cheap. Desperation was everywhere. And this is the world the Ripper exploited.
It was right here, in this powder keg of poverty and desperation, that a series of horrific murders began, kicking off a period of absolute panic that would later become known as the Autumn of Terror.
And take a look at this map. It really shows you just how concentrated the fear was. Those red dots mark the murder locations. They all happened within just a few streets of each other. This wasn't some killer roaming all over London. No, he was operating in an incredibly tight, specific area. A predator who was almost certainly stalking his own neighborhood.
Now, there were at least 11 murders that ended up in the official Whitechapel file, but investigators eventually zeroed in on these 5 women. They became known as the Canonical 5. The thinking was that the very specific, brutal way they were killed linked them all to a single person, all happening between late August and early November of 1888. And notice that terrifying date, September 30th. He struck twice in one night, a double event, as it became known. The terror was escalating.
So, what linked these 5 crimes? It was their shocking brutality and this distinct, terrifying pattern. The victims' throats were cut, and their bodies were subjected to just horrific mutilations. And the precise removal of organs from some of the victims, well, that led to the widespread and absolutely chilling theory that the killer had to have some kind of anatomical or surgical knowledge. This wasn't just random violence, it felt methodical. So you've got a city in a full-blown panic. The pressure to catch this guy was immense. And this led to a massive manhunt, sure. But it also created a media frenzy.
that started to blur the line between the facts of the case and pure fiction.
Now, you might think the police were just sitting on their hands, but that's not true at all. The scale of this investigation was huge for the time. They interviewed over 2,000 people. They looked into more than 300 suspects. But you have to remember, they were fighting a faceless enemy in a city of shadows, with no fingerprints, no DNA, none of the tools we take for granted today. They were essentially chasing a ghost.
And then, this letter arrived at a London news agency. It was taunting, it was chilling, and for the very first time, it was signed with a name: Jack the Ripper. Just like that, the legend was born. But here's the kicker, the real twist that changes everything. Most experts today believe that this letter, and hundreds of others like it, were actually hoaxes, probably written by journalists just to create a sensational story and sell more newspapers.
Okay, so most of the letters were probably fake. But this one, the infamous From Hell letter, this one was a different story entirely. It was sent to George Lusk, the head of that Citizens Vigilance Committee. And it didn't come alone. It arrived with a small box, and inside that box was half of a human kidney preserved in alcohol. The writer claimed he had fried and eaten the other half. This was a direct, terrifying message to the people who were out there hunting for him.
But away from all the media hype, a quieter, more scientific approach was starting to take shape. A police surgeon named Thomas Bond performed autopsies on the victims, and in his notes, he created what many now consider one of the world's very first criminal profiles. He dismissed that popular idea of a surgical genius. Instead, he profiled the killer as a man of solitary habits, someone subject to periodical attacks, basically a quiet loner prone to these sudden, violent, manic episodes.
And then, just as suddenly as they began, the murders stopped. The killer was never caught. He just vanished, leaving behind a mystery that has only grown larger with time, transforming from a criminal case into this enduring cultural phenomenon.
And these two images, they perfectly sum up the Ripper's dual legacy. On the left, you've got a magazine cover guessing at his identity, turning the tragedy into a kind of whodunit, a parlor game. But on the right, a powerful cartoon from the magazine Punch shows a totally different take. It's called The Nemesis of Neglect. And it shows the killer not as a specific man, but as a phantom, a ghost born from society's own sins of poverty and indifference.
So, the million-dollar question: why was he never caught? How did the world's most infamous serial killer just disappear? Well, there's no single easy answer. Forensic science didn't exist yet. The maze-like slums were the perfect escape route. And there was so much public distrust of the police that few witnesses probably ever came forward. In the end, the answer might be brutally simple. He could have died, been locked up for some other crime, or just left the country. We'll likely never know for sure.
Which leaves us with one final haunting question. Was Jack the Ripper some singular, monstrous phantom who just appeared out of the fog? Or was he something even more terrifying, an inevitable product of a society that allowed the poverty and desperation of Whitechapel to fester for so long? Maybe the real mystery isn't just who he was, but what he represents.